second episode of Toke Signals TV, the video cannabis news blog associated with tokesignals.com, in which we bring you the biggest marijuana stories of the week. Before we get down to business this week, let's have a little bit of fun. Let's take a look at our bud pick of the week. And this week, we're looking at a picture of the strain God Bud, which is a pure indica. I got these particular flowers from a dispensary in Bremerton, Washington called Emerald Coast Collective. And they go, as all the flower selections do there at Emerald Coast, for $10 a gram. So you can see some very nice looking flowers here. If you're not able to safely access medical cannabis in your state, as are those of us in 20 states now with the passage of Illinois, which we'll touch on in just a few minutes, you need to contact your legislators. You need to do some work on the ground, and we need to change it so that sick people who need medical cannabis have safe access in all 50 states of the United States. So let's move on and have a look at this week's biggest stories in the news. We've all been keeping an eye on Uruguay in South America. They looked to be possibly the world leader in becoming the first nation on earth to fully legalize and regulate cannabis since the Single Convention on Narcotics back in 1961. So it's been 52 years now that cannabis hasn't been legal anywhere on the globe. This could be a really momentous change here. And sometimes, as Ethan Nadelman of the Drug Policy Alliance said, sometimes it takes a little nation to do big things. Uruguay appears poised to do that, with President Jose Mujica supporting the legalization plan and his broad front party being solidly behind it. There are a couple of possible blips on the horizon when it comes to legalization in Uruguay. One of those is the fact that, according to one recent poll, 63% of the population there in Uruguay is against legalization. Apparently, they still need some education in that regard and are holding on possibly to some reefer madness myths. The other big roadblock that could be significant going down the road, especially when it comes to possible legalization efforts in other countries, is the fact that an arm of the United Nations this week has warned Uruguay against marijuana legalization. Now, you might think that countries would be free to set their own drug policies as they see fit, but what we have here in Uruguay is a test case, in my opinion. In 1961, Harry J. Anslinger, the infamous architect of marijuana prohibition in the United States, really made his power play for all time. He had been able to get cannabis outlawed in the U.S. back in 1937. But in 1961, Anslinger realized his lifelong ambition by getting every nation on earth to sign on to the Single Convention Treaty on Narcotics. Not only did they all agree not to allow recreational use of marijuana, but they agreed that they would never legalize it, that marijuana would be illegal for all time. Now, as mind-boggling as that seems, to discount the possibility of progress ever happening on the drug reform front, that's what Anslinger was able to get through back in 1961, and we're still saddled with that today. And that's the reason that the International Narcotics Control Board, a subsidiary of the UN, has expressed concern over moves by Uruguay to legalize marijuana. What they said about it was that a legalization law in Uruguay would be in complete contravention to the provisions of the international drug treaties to which Uruguay is a party. And under the bill in Uruguay, which has been passed by the lower house of their legislature and still needs to be approved by the Senate, the government would assume control of growing and selling cannabis to recreational users. Now, the INCB, you may be wondering, who are these guys and why do they feel they have input? It's an independent group of experts established by the United Nations to monitor countries' compliance with international drug treaties, including the Single Convention. And they released a statement just hours after the legalization bill was approved by Uruguay's House, saying that such a law would violate the Single Convention on Narcotic Drugs of 1961, which explicitly bans the sale of marijuana for non-medical use. They said that if Uruguay adopts marijuana legalization, it might have serious consequences for the health and welfare of the population and for the prevention of cannabis abuse among the youth. But the thinking of the ruling government in Uruguay is that they hope to remove profits from the drug dealers and divert users from harder and more harmful drugs. It was a close vote in the House of Representatives in Uruguay, with 50 voting for legalization, 46 against. And this was after a really fierce 13-hour debate, if you could imagine that. It's a hard-fought battle there, as it is here. Supporters argued that the war on drugs and on traffickers has failed and that the country needs new alternatives to marijuana prohibition. Sebastian Sabatini of the governing center-left Broad Front Coalition said that regulation is not to promote consumption. Consumption already exists. It is merely to regulate and control what is already there. Cannabis use has doubled in Uruguay over the past few years, according to some reports, and the National Drugs Committee there says that 22 tons of marijuana is sold in Uruguay every year. The bill goes to the Senate now, and it's expected to pass there because the Broad Front Party has a ruling majority in the Senate. It could become law before the end of the year. But with those challenges that I mentioned, which the UN disapproves of the law, and apparently a sizable chunk of the populace too. So that bears close watching down in Uruguay to see what happens next. Could they become the first country on earth to legalize marijuana? Yes, they could, and very soon. Big changes happening up here in the United States as well. This week, Illinois became the 20th state to legalize the medicinal use of cannabis. Governor Pat Quinn of Illinois, on August the 1st, in a ceremony, signed the bill which legalizes medical marijuana in Illinois, a big victory for the medical marijuana movement. Under Illinois' medical marijuana law, it can be authorized for patients with nausea from cancer treatment, with multiple sclerosis, with AIDS, and with a couple of dozen other specifically named ailments. The effort had fallen short for years in Illinois, especially in the House. But this spring, Lou Lang, a state representative from Skokie, who has been a great friend to the medical marijuana movement for years and has introduced this bill time and again, was finally able to get together the votes needed to send this bill to the Senate. And once it went to the Senate, it was almost a foregone conclusion because they had passed in previous years a less restrictive, more expansive medical marijuana bill. So it was a pretty sure bet that they were going to vote for this one, which has more restrictions. They did. And Representative Lang was finally able to get that through, and the governor signed it. Lang said that his goal from the beginning was to provide a better quality of life for some very sick people in Illinois. And he said when the governor signed the bill, it's a signal to many people that the state of Illinois still has a lot of compassion, a lot of concern for those under a doctor's care who wish to try a new type of therapy and who wish to simply try to feel better. Governor Quinn had said that he had an open mind on the bill as it gained momentum, but it wasn't a sure thing he was going to sign it until just the last couple of days. The law will take effect on January the 1st, 2014, and under its terms, patients can possess up to 2.5 ounces of marijuana. They will be allowed to buy that amount every 2 weeks at state licensed dispensaries. There are going to be up to 60 state licensed dispensaries throughout the state of Illinois. Unfortunately, patients won't be allowed to grow their own. One unique thing about Illinois' medical marijuana program is that it is a 4-year pilot program. It actually expires after 4 years. They built this in as a safety hatch in case, say, that it didn't work out and that they wanted to get rid of medical marijuana after trying it. They didn't want to be stuck with it, so they can either vote to continue the program after the 4-year trial, or they can shut it down. And of course, if the program is administered at all properly, I think that they're going to be keeping that after 4 years. Who would want to remove safe access for hundreds or thousands of seriously ill patients once they've found the actual medicine that works best for them? So let's keep an eye on Illinois. Let's keep them honest there. And after that 4 years are up, hopefully they can establish permanent safe access for the patients. Over in California, there's a disturbing story came to light this week, which goes back to a raid that happened in April 2012. A student at the University of California, San Diego, Daniel Chong, was arrested at a 420 party in April 2012. Once the DEA had him, federal agents locked him in a cell in handcuffs and forgot him for 5 days. In the cell, there were no toilet facilities. There was no running water. Of course, since he had been completely forgotten, he wasn't brought any food. This young man would have died if he hadn't taken extreme measures. And when I say extreme measures, I'm talking about Daniel Chong had to drink his own urine to keep from dying. He said, "They never came back. They ignored all my cries, and I still don't know what happened. I'm not sure how they could forget me." When he got out, he understandably filed a $20 million lawsuit against the DEA for leaving him with nothing to eat or drink while in handcuffs for 5 days. And that lawsuit has been settled now by the DEA for $4.1 million. The DEA has apologized and admitted wrongdoing in the case. After leaving him in the cell, he had been told, "Hang tight, we'll come get you in a minute." And then 5 days later, they came and get him out. By that time, he was having acute kidney failure, muscle degeneration, dehydration. The young man spent 3 days in intensive care, and he was released from the hospital after 5 days. He says that now that his body and his PTSD are gradually healing, and he expects to graduate college next year. He also said that he accepts that it was an accident on the part of the DEA, although he called it a really, really bad, horrible accident. And he said he believed the apology from his captors was sincere. After spending 5 days kicking on the door, screaming and begging and hoping to get someone's attention, he even gave up and attempted to carve a goodbye note to his mother in his arm at one point. We can only hope that this young man is able to heal the psychological wounds that would be left on any reasonable person after that kind of an ordeal. And we can also hope that a good, long, hard look will be taken at the kinds of policies and oversights that let this happen. Of course, a lot of us would say he shouldn't have been in that jail cell in the first place. But if they're going to put him in there, at least take humane care of him. We're moving to another story from California, and this is a positive one. We got a report this week that says the lung effects of smoking marijuana are much less than those of smoking tobacco. The study looked at the pulmonary impact of smoking cannabis regularly and found that it's far less than that of smoking tobacco. The study was from Dr. Donald P. Tashkin, who's one of the leading pulmonary researchers in the world. He's Emeritus Professor of Medicine and Medical Director of the Pulmonary Function Laboratory at UCLA. And his survey of a number of other studies, found that habitual marijuana use alone doesn't appear to lead to significant abnormalities in lung function. It also significantly doesn't increase the risk of chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, COPD, or either lung cancer or upper airway cancer. Smoking marijuana is associated with an increase in chronic bronchitis because inhaling any smoke tends to irritate those passageways. But those symptoms go away quickly upon discontinuation of marijuana smoking, according to Dr. Tashkin. He said the accumulated weight of evidence implies far lower risks for pulmonary complications of even regular heavy use of marijuana compared with the grave pulmonary consequences of tobacco. The report is getting a lot of attention because of the respect and expertise of Dr. Tashkin. The article was called the most comprehensive and authoritative review of the subject ever published, according to Dr. Mark A. Ware. And the conclusion that smoking marijuana is not a major risk factor for airway cancer or COPD will affect the way health professionals interact with patients, will affect the way parents interact with teenagers, and will affect the way policymakers interact with their constituents, Dr. Ware predicted. Now, he seems to be pretty optimistic about the impact of scientific results on public policy and on person-to-person communication. I would like to share his optimism and to give that optimism a little more rational basis. Let's all do all we can to get the truth out there when it comes to this report and when it comes to the health effects of cannabis in general. There was another positive study came out over the past week, this one from Stanford University, and it impacts the possibly controversial subject of using medical marijuana with children. What this study found was that marijuana has possible therapeutic applications in autistic children. The study found that the mutations associated with autism block the action of endocannabinoids in the brain. The endocannabinoids are the body's naturally occurring cannabinoids that are an almost exact match for the phytocannabinoids, the plant cannabinoids found in marijuana. That's the reason marijuana has all the effects it does, is because we already have these receptors in our bodies for these naturally occurring substances. The first exposure any of us had to cannabinoids was not the first time we smoked pot. If you were breastfed, your first exposure to cannabinoids was the first time you drank your mother's milk. That's how safe the cannabinoids are. That's how natural they are. And that's how essential they are. One reason researchers believe that they're there in the mother's milk is to stimulate the appetite of the baby, to make it more interested in eating. The cannabinoids are essential for life. They're essential for health. And now we are finding increasing applications where they can help people with serious diseases, including childhood autism. That cannabis affects autism in a possibly therapeutic way adds to the chorus of parents who are already asking for safe access for their children. The simple fact is that the pharmaceutical drugs which are offered parents of children with autism, with other serious diseases, often have undesirable side effects. They can be very dangerous. They present the opportunity of liver damage, and they can also result in overdose and even death. Cannabis has never resulted in a single human fatality. It is much milder. And in the opinion of those who have looked into the subject, it is much less impactful on these young people. Researchers have suggested that the mild sedative properties of marijuana can supplement or even replace the need for stimulant speed-like drugs such as Ritalin and Adderall, which are the drugs of choice currently given to ADHD kids, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and are also commonly given to autistic kids. The study was published in the scientific journal Neuron, and its purpose was to look at how cannabis affects autism in children and the possible therapeutic effects thereupon. University of Maryland neuroscientist Bradley Alger called it a very stimulating finding, which could be a real turning point in understanding tonic endocannabinoids and how this otherwise mysterious lipid signaling really works. So we appear to be moving toward possible breakthroughs in the treatment of autism, once again thanks to medical research on the properties of cannabis. That covers the biggest cannabis stories of the week for the second episode of Toke TV. Hope you've enjoyed them. We'll be back again next week with more. In the meantime, if you have a marijuana bud pick that you would like to be considered for Toke TV's Bud Pick of the Week, send it to tokesignals@gmail.com, and we will certainly take a look at it. If it's nice, your bud could be a star. Hope to see you right here next week. Until then, stay lifted.